I think I didn't do anything wrong, just made a joke. That's what I keep telling myself. But the look on Marcus's face when I said it, when everyone laughed at him in that restaurant, that was the moment he stopped being my husband and started being quiet. Too quiet. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Selene Ardent, and I still don't understand why everyone acted like I did something unforgivable. It was just a joke, a single line at my husband's birthday dinner that made everyone laugh except him. I thought honesty and humor made things lighter, not lethal. Marcus has always been so serious, so careful with every word, every breath, like living with a human rulebook. So when I teased him in front of his friends, I thought I was reminding him to loosen up, to show people we were modern, open, real. He didn't yell or argue. He just stood, placed a few bills on the table and walked out. That silence, that perfect calm silence, has haunted me more than any fight ever could. Everyone says I humiliated him, but how can it be humiliation if it was meant as love? That night should have been proof that I was the honest one, the brave one. Instead, it became the night everything turned cold. Now people whisper that I deserve what's coming, but none of them were there. None of them saw his face when he decided he was done talking and started preparing. It started on a Thursday night, the kind of night that should have felt special. The lights in the restaurant were low and gold, the tables wrapped in white linen, the sound of soft music blending with polite laughter from other people celebrating something. It was Marcus's birthday, and I'd planned everything. I picked the restaurant, invited his closest friends, even arranged for his mother to come, though she barely leaves her house anymore. I wanted it to be perfect, and in my mind, it was. I was dressed in the black dress he always said he liked, the one with the small shimmer under certain lights. He wore his usual grey jacket, the one that made him look like a professor. He looked calm, as always, steady in a way that used to make me feel safe, but lately just made me feel bored. Everyone had gathered around the long table near the back. There was wine, laughter, and small talk about work. Julian sat across from me, Marcus's friend since college, now my coworker at the event firm. He's charming, with the kind of easy confidence Marcus never had. They'd stayed close even after I started working with Julian. It used to make Marcus proud, his wife and best friend succeeding together. I think he stopped feeling that way when he noticed how much Julian made me laugh. When dessert came, someone made a toast to Marcus, something polite and boring about his reliability. I smiled, thinking the night needed some spark, something that made people remember it, so when the laughter quieted, I leaned toward him and said, loud enough for the table to hear, that there was something I wanted to confess. I said it like a joke, light and teasing. Everyone smiled, expecting some funny story. Marcus looked at me, a little wary but patient, that same calm expression he always wore when he didn't know what was coming. I told them that Julian had tried something with me at work a few weeks ago. Just a comment, a touch that went too far. I said I stopped it, of course, but I wanted to be honest, because that's what strong relationships are built on. For a second, there was absolute silence. Forks froze. Glasses stopped mid-air. Julian went pale. His wife, Leah, stared at her plate. I laughed to fill the space, waving my hand like it was no big deal. I said honesty was important, that I wasn't ashamed because I had done nothing wrong. Marcus didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just looked at me, then at Julian, then back at me again. His eyes didn't have anger in them, just something heavy, like disappointment wrapped in quiet. He took a small breath, set his napkin down, and said very softly, "Thank you for the truth." Then he stood up. He reached into his pocket, took out his wallet, and placed several folded bills neatly beside his plate. Everyone watched him. He didn't say another word. He just adjusted his jacket, nodded once toward his mother, and walked out of the restaurant. The door didn't slam, it just clicked shut behind him. The silence that followed felt endless. I could feel heat crawling up my neck, but I forced a laugh. I said he probably just needed some air, that he'd calm down once he realized I was being honest. Ruth, his mother, didn't smile. She looked at me like I had just slapped her son. Leah said quietly that maybe this wasn't the right setting for something like that. I snapped back that it was better to tell the truth in front of everyone than to hide it in whispers. Julian muttered something about a misunderstanding, said I must have taken things too personally. I cut him off, saying he shouldn't deny what happened. He looked like he wanted to vanish. I kept talking because silence felt dangerous. I said things like, if we can't talk openly, then what kind of adults are we? And at least I didn't lie. The more I spoke, the smaller everyone's eyes became, retreating from me. Finally, Ruth stood up, her movements slow but precise, like every inch of her body was deliberate. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You humiliated him on his birthday." That word, humiliated, burned in my ears. I wanted to argue, to say it wasn't humiliation if it was truth. I told her that Marcus was just too sensitive, that I was trying to make a point about trust. She didn't respond. She just shook her head and walked away. Her small purse clutched against her chest, like she was afraid it might fall apart. Leah followed her. Julian made an excuse about needing to make a call. Within minutes, the table was empty. Just me, the candle still flickering, the untouched cake, and a bill already paid. I sat there for a long time, the noise of other people's laughter echoing from nearby tables. My reflection in the window looked pale and strained. I told myself he'd come back once he cooled off. He always did. Marcus wasn't the type to make scenes. He would come home, and we'd talk, and I'd make him see that what I did wasn't betrayal, it was bravery. When I finally stood up, the waiter asked softly if I wanted the dessert packed up. I told him to throw it away. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Outside, the air was cold. The streetlights flickered against the glass, and I pulled my coat tighter around me. I checked my phone. No messages. I typed one quickly. "You overreacted. Let's talk when you're calm." Then I deleted it. Maybe it sounded too harsh. I typed another. "I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just wanted to be open." That one I sent. He didn't reply. At home, his car wasn't in the driveway. The house was dark except for the porch light. I went inside and turned on the kitchen light. 2 mugs sat by the sink, his spotless, mine half full from that morning. It annoyed me how perfect he always left things. I poured myself a glass of wine and told myself he was probably driving around to think. Around midnight, I checked his location on my phone. He had turned off sharing. That was new. I scrolled through old photos of us, his arm around me at a barbecue, the way he always stood slightly behind me in group pictures, like he didn't need to prove anything. I closed the app. At some point, I started laughing. The kind of laugh that's too loud, almost shaky. It all felt ridiculous. All that tension over something I said half as a joke. Everyone's acting like I confessed to a crime, I thought. I was the one being honest. I was the one keeping things real. But when I went upstairs, his side of the bed was empty, the sheets smooth and cold. He had taken his charger but left his watch. I stared at it for a long time, the ticking sound unnerving in the quiet. I kept imagining him at a hotel, sitting in that calm, patient way he always did when he didn't want to argue. Maybe he was thinking about how to make me apologize. Maybe he wanted to scare me into realizing how much he mattered. It was working. I hated that it was working. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen, too bright, almost mocking. His mug was still in its usual spot, clean, upside down. I made coffee anyway, just to fill the air with noise. As I reached for my phone, I saw a new message pinned to the fridge in his handwriting. It wasn't a note. It was a grocery list. Milk, eggs, printer paper. That last item stuck out. He never bought that. I opened the drawer where we kept office supplies. Empty. The printer light blinked faintly. I pressed the button, and it spat out a blank page. I crumpled it and tossed it aside. Probably a glitch. By afternoon, he still hadn't come home. Ruth didn't answer my calls. When I tried Julian, his wife picked up instead and said he was busy. Her tone was cold enough to cut through static. I told myself it would all blow over once Marcus cooled down. He couldn't possibly stay mad forever. He was too calm for that. That's what made me feel superior to other women. I didn't have to deal with drama. My husband was the quiet type, logical, predictable. Still, that night I checked the driveway 3 times. Every sound made me glance toward the door. Nothing. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through my phone again. No messages, no calls. Just silence. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the restaurant, the faces frozen around the table, the candlelight flickering over Julian's shocked expression, Marcus's steady eyes. I thought of his hand placing the folded bills beside the plate. How careful he was, how exact. Not angry, not emotional. Just finished. It hit me then that his silence wasn't confusion. It was decision, and I hated how calm that realization made me feel. The next morning, I told myself things would settle. They always did with Marcus. He didn't hold grudges. He held silence, and silence could be broken with the right tone of voice. I made coffee, fixed my hair, even set the table like nothing had happened. But when the clock hit 10 and he still hadn't come home, I started feeling something that wasn't quite fear, more like irritation wrapped in confusion. How long did he plan to keep this little performance going? By noon, I decided to take control. I texted him, "We need to talk." Then, "You're overreacting." Still nothing. I sent another. "At least tell me you're okay." The message marked as delivered, but no response. I spent the rest of the day pacing the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed too loudly, the air too still. The untouched cake from last night sat on the counter, a reminder of what should have been a celebration. Around 2, I noticed a calendar notification pop up on his tablet, still sitting on the sideboard. The title said, Downtown 9:25. It wasn't a work meeting. Marcus never wrote times like that. I stared at it until the screen went dark. That evening, I heard the garage door open, relief mixed with something sharp. When he walked in, he looked freshly showered, calm, pressed shirt, no sign of a long night anywhere on him. I asked where he'd been. He said he went for a drive. I told him I stayed up worrying. He said he was fine. I asked why he didn't call. He said, "You seemed busy telling everyone the truth last night." His voice was even, almost polite. I told him we shouldn't turn this into something dramatic. He said, "You already did." The way he said it, quietly, like he wasn't even angry, threw me off. Usually silence meant I'd won, that he had nothing left to argue. But this silence was different. It felt like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I followed him into the kitchen, asking if he planned to keep ignoring me. He opened a cabinet, took down his mug, poured coffee and set it next to mine. 2 mugs again, but now they felt like proof of distance instead of routine. He sat at the table, scrolling on his phone. I said, "You embarrassed me by walking out." He looked up just long enough to say, "I didn't embarrass you. You did that yourself." I laughed, too loud, trying to keep control of the tone. I said he was twisting things, that I was being honest, not cruel. He nodded once, like he was taking notes. That night, when I walked past the guest room, I heard a faint clicking noise. The door was slightly open, the lamp on. He sat at the small desk I hadn't seen him use in years. Papers were stacked neatly, folders labeled in his small handwriting. Household, utilities, bank. I leaned against the doorframe, pretending to be casual. "What's with the folders?" I asked. "Organization," he said without looking up. "You never organize." He clicked a pen shut and replied, "People change." I walked closer. Since when do you label things? He closed one drawer and turned the key in the lock. The click was soft but final. I forced a laugh. What's in there? My list of sins? He said, just numbers. I told him he was being dramatic. He said, you keep using that word for other people. I hated how calm he was. The stillness of his hands, the measured tone, it all felt rehearsed. I accused him of trying to punish me. He said he wasn't punishing anyone, just preparing. Preparing for what? I asked. He didn't answer. Later, I walked into our bedroom and saw he'd taken his work bag and laptop into the guest room. I stood in the doorway waiting for him to notice me. He didn't. When I asked if he was moving out, he said, no, just moving over. I told him to stop talking like a lawyer. He said, someone should. I went downstairs to call Marina, my closest friend from work. She had seen the dinner post online. Felix, another coworker, had tagged me in a photo of the restaurant with the caption, Best Company. It had a few hundred likes already. Marina joked that it looked like I was in a love triangle. I told her it was harmless. She said, then why do you sound defensive? By the time I hung up, the house felt smaller. I could hear the faint hum of the printer again, followed by the quiet tearing of paper. When I peeked into the guest room, the printer light was still blinking. I caught a glimpse of a spreadsheet on his laptop screen, rows and dates. I could only make out a few words. Expenses, transfers, copies. I stepped back before he turned around. The next morning, Marcus left early. His side of the bed was smooth again, the sheets tucked too neatly. I found another note on the fridge. Buy paper. He was still drinking coffee. His cup was clean in the sink. I wondered why he always washed his, but never touched mine. I went to work pretending everything was fine. My coworkers were polite but cautious. Someone whispered something as I passed. Something about the birthday confession. I smiled through it, saying Marcus was dramatic, that men didn't know how to handle strong women. It worked for a few laughs. I needed those laughs. They made me feel in control again. At lunch, I called Ruth. She didn't answer. When she finally texted back, all she wrote was, give him space. He's processing. I wanted to throw my phone. Processing? What was there to process? I told one awkward truth in a room full of adults. That night, when I got home, the house smelled like paper and toner. The guest room door was closed. I knocked. No answer. I opened it anyway. The room looked different, too clean. His suit jacket hung on the back of the chair, the desk perfectly arranged. On the wall was a calendar with tiny notes written in pencil. One square read, meeting personal. Another said, follow up. I asked if he'd started therapy or something. He said no, just meetings. I said, what kind of meetings? He said, the kind that fix things. I told him we needed to stop turning our marriage into paperwork. He said, paper keeps things clear. I snapped that marriage wasn't an invoice. He said, you keep mistaking feelings for evidence. The conversation ended there. At midnight, I woke up and went downstairs for water. His phone was charging on the counter. I shouldn't have, but I looked. The last message thread was titled with a single emoji. My heart beat faster. I didn't open it. I just stared at the icon until the screen went black. When I looked up, he was standing in the doorway watching me. Can't sleep? He asked. I said I was thirsty. He nodded. You'll feel better if you stop looking for things. I told him not to talk to me like I was a child. He said, then stop acting like one. I went back upstairs shaking, more from anger than guilt. I told myself he was bluffing, playing some long game of moral high ground. But I could feel something shifting, something steady beneath the surface of his calm. Over the next few days, he became methodical. Quiet mornings, clean dishes, neat rows of documents. His laptop was always open but angled away from me. The sound of the shredder hummed occasionally, soft and deliberate. Every night, a new folder appeared on his desk: insurance, joint account, mortgage. I tried to break through the silence with humor. One morning I said, "You're acting like we're divorcing." He said, "I'm acting like I've learned." I rolled my eyes. "You think you're the victim here." He looked at me for a long time and said, "I think I'm done being your experiment." That line hit harder than any shout could have. Later that day, I got a call from Faye at work. She said she saw Marcus at a notary office downtown. I laughed, said she must have been mistaken. She said she was sure it was him, signing something. My stomach twisted, but I brushed it off. I told her he was probably handling something boring, like car insurance. When I got home, he was on the balcony, looking out at the streetlights. He didn't turn when I came out. I asked what he was thinking. He said, "How calm the city looks from up here." I said he was scaring me. He said, "You scared me first. You just didn't notice." I told him he was overanalyzing everything, that I just wanted us to move on. He turned finally and said, "I am moving on." Then he went inside, leaving me standing in the cold. Hours later, I lay awake in the dark, listening. Around 1 a.m., I heard his drawer click shut again, the sound of a key turning. Then silence. For the first time, it occurred to me that maybe he wasn't trying to punish me. Maybe he was just documenting me. By the end of that week, I decided that if Marcus wanted to play quiet, I'd play confident. Someone had to keep the story alive, and silence never helped anyone's reputation. People were already talking, coworkers giving those careful smiles, neighbors asking if Marcus was traveling. I hated the way pity sounded when it came wrapped in politeness, so I did what I do best. I took control of the narrative. On Monday, I showed up to work early, dressed sharper than usual. The office hummed with low chatter. A few people looked up when I walked in. I smiled wider than I felt and said I'd had a wild weekend, that Marcus needed time to cool off after a misunderstanding. I framed it like a sitcom plot, harmless and funny. They laughed a little, and I clung to that laughter. It meant I still owned the version people would believe. Julian avoided me. His desk was empty when I arrived, though his jacket hung on the chair. I told myself it was guilt, not avoidance. He had every reason to feel awkward. I'd just been honest about what he'd done. I wasn't the villain here. By lunch, my phone buzzed with notifications. Someone had posted a clip from the restaurant. The toast, the laughter, me smiling in candlelight. It looked harmless, almost elegant. I reshared it with a caption. Honesty might hurt, but silence kills. Within an hour, it had over 200 likes. Comments poured in from people I barely knew. "You're so brave for speaking your truth." "Queen energy." "Men can't handle real women." I read them all twice, then a third time. Validation felt like oxygen. When I got home that evening, the lights in the house were dim. Marcus was at the kitchen table typing on his laptop. I said I'd gone viral. He said nothing. I laughed, told him people finally understood me. He said, "They understand what you showed them." I told him perception was reality. He said, "So is evidence." I rolled my eyes. "You sound like a lawyer again." He said, "Maybe I've been studying." That word stuck to me. Studying. Like he was preparing for an exam, except the subject was us. I noticed new papers stacked neatly beside his laptop, each in clear sleeves. His handwriting labeled them: mortgage, statements, photos. The sight made me uncomfortable, but I didn't let him see it. I teased him for becoming Mr. Organized. He said, "I like clarity." The next morning, I overheard him on the phone. His tone was calm, professional. I caught pieces, words like verification, copies, timeline. I asked who he was talking to. He said, "Just following up." I told him his cryptic behavior was childish. He said, "Better than reckless." At work, Faye brought me coffee and whispered that I might want to check my social feed. Someone had posted a screenshot of a comment Marcus left under one of my photos. A simple one. Interesting version of events. No emojis, no context. It had already gathered replies. People were speculating, some saying I'd made things up for attention. I deleted the post immediately. At lunch, I cornered Julian in the break room. He looked tired, his voice low. I told him not to act like he was innocent. He said I'd turned a stupid joke into a scandal. I told him I saved both of us by controlling the story. He asked if I ever stopped performing. That word, performing, made me snap. I said he was lucky I didn't name him in the caption. He said something about his wife wanting him to quit the firm. Then he walked out, leaving his coffee half full on the counter. That night, when I came home, the house smelled faintly of toner again. Marcus was sitting on the couch reading something. He looked composed, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled neatly. I asked if he'd seen the online comments. He said yes. I asked if he cared. He said, "Not about comments." I told him people were turning on me. He said, "Maybe they're just seeing clearly." I accused him of feeding rumors. He said he didn't need to. The truth was doing fine on its own. The printer hummed again. I asked what he was printing. He said, "History." The sound made my skin crawl. Later, I sat on the balcony, scrolling through my phone, reading every message from people who'd once envied us. The silence of the city felt heavy, like everyone was watching from behind their windows. I took a photo of the skyline and posted it with a caption, "Healing alone isn't weakness, it's strength." The post got immediate likes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the only person who mattered wasn't looking. The next morning, Marcus wasn't home. His car was gone, but the guest room light was still on. Inside, everything was in perfect order again. On the desk sat a single USB drive, labeled with yesterday's date. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket, more out of curiosity than fear. At work, I plugged it into my computer. Inside was nothing but folders titled Archive A and Archive B. Each contained photos, emails, documents, our entire life catalogued, screenshots of my posts, financial records, even messages I'd sent to Julian about needing attention. My breath caught. He'd been copying everything. I yanked the drive out and stared at it in my hand. I felt a mix of fury and panic. This was beyond silent treatment. This was betrayal. I decided I wouldn't let him turn our marriage into evidence. That evening, when he came home, I confronted him. I threw the USB onto the counter and said he'd crossed a line. He looked at it, then at me, and said calmly, "You shouldn't take what doesn't belong to you." I said, "What's wrong with you? Are you spying on me now?" He said, "No, just documenting what's already public." I told him that was insane. He said, "So was humiliating your husband for applause." The room went quiet, except for the faint buzz of the fridge. I could feel my heart pounding, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear. I told him he'd regret making this ugly. He said, "It's not ugly, it's accurate." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every small sound made me flinch. The printer beeped once around midnight, followed by the soft rustle of paper. I didn't dare check. By morning, he was gone again. His side of the bed untouched. On the counter sat 2 mugs, his perfectly clean, mine with coffee dried at the bottom. The calendar on the fridge now had a new entry, downtown 10:40. I grabbed my phone and texted him, "What's happening downtown?" He didn't answer. At work, Faye showed me something on her phone. "Look," she whispered. It was a photo someone had uploaded. Marcus, standing outside an office building, shaking hands with a man in a suit. The caption said, "Client meeting, productive morning." The man beside him was from a law firm. I knew because his logo was visible on the briefcase. My stomach dropped. I tried to laugh it off. "Probably taxes," I said. Faye looked unconvinced. I went home early that day. The house felt too quiet. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and his folders were gone. I walked from room to room calling his name, even though I knew he wasn't there. The guest room drawers were empty, except for a single sticky note on the desk. In his small, steady handwriting, it said, "You always wanted to be seen. Now you will be." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I told myself it was just more of his melodrama, his attempt to guilt me into apologizing. But then I saw a new message on my phone, an email from a sender I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Follow-up documentation." The body contained only one sentence. "Please confirm receipt for records." I deleted it instantly, though I couldn't stop thinking about what records meant. That evening, when Marcus finally walked through the door, I was ready. I told him I was done playing this passive-aggressive game. He said, "You already finished it." I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll find out soon enough." I told him he was bluffing. He smiled, softly, almost kindly, and said, "Keep believing that. It makes things easier." He went upstairs without another word. I sat in the kitchen, the house too bright around me, the smell of paper thick in the air. On the counter, his mug sat next to mine again. Side by side, perfectly placed, like proof of two people who used to share mornings. I kept staring at that photo of him outside the law office. He looked so composed, like a man who finally understood the ending, to a story he'd been rereading for too long. Everyone in the comments said things like "professional as always" or "so proud of you, Marcus." No one mentioned me, not once. It was as if I'd been erased from the picture altogether, and maybe that was the point. For 2 days, he barely spoke to me. We moved through the same rooms like polite strangers. When he left his keys on the counter, I noticed an unfamiliar one on the ring, small, silver, labeled drawer. The same drawer in the guest room he'd been locking for weeks. I thought about taking it just to see what was inside, but something about the calm precision of his movements made me hesitate. He wasn't acting like someone bluffing, he was acting like someone finished. By Friday, Ruth called. Her voice was clipped, formal. She asked if I was coming to Sunday dinner. I said I didn't see the point if Marcus refused to talk. She said, "Then maybe you should listen instead." That tone, the quiet disappointment, made me feel 12 again. I told her she had no idea what was really going on. She said, "I know enough." Still, I went. I couldn't let her think I was hiding. Her house smelled like rosemary and lemon polish. The table was already set when we arrived. Marcus pulled out a chair for me, courteous, careful. Ruth gave him a small nod, as if they'd rehearsed the civility. I smiled too brightly and said, "Nice to see we can all act like adults." No one laughed. Dinner passed in brittle politeness until Ruth asked how work was. I said it was fine, that people had mostly stopped gossiping. She said, "That's because Marcus asked them to." I froze. "Asked who?" I said. "Everyone who mattered," she replied. I looked at Marcus and he didn't deny it. "You're going behind my back?" I asked. "I'm going through proper channels," he said. The word proper again. Always proper. I told him he was trying to destroy me. He said, "No, you're doing that yourself. I'm just cleaning up." I could feel the walls closing in. I turned to Ruth, hoping for sympathy, but her eyes were steady. "Humor can't build a home, Selene," she said. "Neither can shame." I tried to change the subject, asking about the kids. Ruth mentioned that Marcus had taken them to the park that morning. "They said you were working," she added. I said I was. Marcus said, "They also said you posted from a bar." The air tightened. "So now you're keeping score through the children?" I snapped. He looked directly at me. "No, I'm making sure they know which parent tells the truth." That was the moment I realized he'd stopped being my husband. He wasn't arguing anymore. He was building a case. I pushed my chair back, told Ruth I was done being cornered. She said, "Then stop drawing corners." I grabbed my bag and stormed out, but before I reached the door, I heard her say softly to him, "Handle it properly." Those words echoed the whole drive home. When I got back, the house felt smaller, like the air itself was holding its breath. The calendar on the fridge had a new entry. Meeting, 8:30 a.m. No other details. I poured a drink, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. My phone buzzed, a message from my sister, Tamsin. She said, "Mom told me everything." "Why would you do that at his birthday?" I wrote back, "It was a joke." She replied, "Then why does it sound like you're losing everything over it?" I threw the phone on the couch and went to the kids' room. Their toys were lined up neatly, their beds made. Marcus must have done it earlier. Even their little world was organized now. When he came home later, I was waiting in the hallway. I told him I was tired of being punished. He said, "No one's punishing you." I said, "Then what is all this?" He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Preparation." I laughed, but it came out shaky. "You think you can fix your pride with paperwork?" He said, "No, I'm fixing the damage." I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer. He walked past me to the kitchen, poured himself water, and said, almost gently, "You'll understand soon. I promise it'll be proper." That word again. It landed differently this time. Not a threat, not a warning, but a conclusion. Later, when I checked my phone, there was a reminder I didn't remember setting. Paper drop, 10:45. My stomach twisted. The timing matched the mysterious calendar entries he'd been adding. At midnight, I sat in bed scrolling through old photos, our smiles frozen in better years. I wondered how something that looked so steady could break so quietly. No shouting, no slammed doors, just this creeping sense that everything familiar was being filed away somewhere I couldn't reach. I tried to tell myself he wouldn't go through with anything. Marcus wasn't cruel. He was careful, methodical, logical. But I also remembered how he'd said, "You'll understand soon." As I turned off the lamp, I heard the faint whir of the shredder downstairs, steady and slow, like breathing. I woke up the next morning with my heart already racing, like my body knew something I didn't. The calendar alert from the night before still sat on my phone screen. Paper drop. 10:45. I told myself it was just some automated thing, maybe a reminder he'd set for printing documents. Marcus liked tidy names for everything. It didn't have to mean anything serious. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was counting down to something I wasn't invited to. At work, I tried to act normal. I wore a bright blazer, did my makeup sharper than usual, and walked through the office like the main character in a movie. If I looked confident, people would treat me that way. That's how it works. Faye asked if everything was okay. I said Marcus and I were just redefining boundaries, that he needed to calm down, and I needed to feel seen. I framed it like a modern marriage adjustment, something trendy. She gave me a strange look and asked if I was sure I wasn't pushing him too far. I said he knew what he married. She said quietly that maybe he'd learned more than he wanted to. At 10:46, my phone buzzed. For a second, my breath stopped. The notification wasn't from Marcus. It was from my cloud storage app. File uploaded successfully, Archive A. I stared at it, my fingers going numb. Archive. He'd named his USBs that. Faye asked what was wrong. I forced a laugh and said it was just boring backup stuff. She didn't press, but she didn't fully believe me either. I could see it in her eyes. Around lunch, Julian finally walked into the office. He kept his distance, head down. I walked over anyway. I told him Marcus had been collecting things, and that it was stressing me out. Julian said Marcus had every right to be angry. I snapped that he didn't get to act righteous after what he did at work. He said he'd already confessed everything to Leah, and that she was furious with both of us. Both of us. I didn't like being put in the same category as him. I told Julian he was the one who crossed the line first. He said I had turned a stupid bit of flirting into a public execution. That word, execution, hit too close to what I was afraid Marcus was planning. When I got home, the house was quiet. The guest room door was open for once. Inside, the desk was almost empty. No folders, no stacks, no visible USBs, just the calendar on the wall and one mug ring on the wood. The wall calendar had more neat little notes. Meeting, personal, follow-up, 9:25 downtown. On the bedside table in our room, his wedding ring sat in a small ceramic dish. He hadn't worn it in days, but seeing it placed there, carefully, like an item being catalogued, made my chest tighten. The kids were in the living room, watching a cartoon. Nora asked if Daddy was mad at me. I said no, he was just tired. Max, older and sharper, asked why Daddy had said he might not live here all the time soon. The way he said it, plain, factual, made my stomach drop. I told Max he must have misunderstood. He said he didn't misunderstand anything. Later, when Marcus came home, he greeted the kids warmly, asked about their day, helped them with homework. He didn't look at me. That hurt more than any argument. There he was, the good father, the calm man, while I sat there feeling like an intruder in my own house. After the kids went to bed, I cornered him in the kitchen. I asked if he'd been talking to them about leaving. He said he had talked to them about changes. I said he had no right to scare them. He said he was trying not to surprise them. I demanded to know what that meant. He wiped his hands on a towel, folded it neatly, and said he'd explain everything, soon, in the right setting. I told him I was done being strung along. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with that calm steadiness that used to make me feel safe. Now it just made me angry. He said I kept acting like I was still in control of the story. I said I was, because it was my life. He said, no, it's our life. That's why there are witnesses. That word again, witnesses. I said he was making this into some kind of courtroom fantasy. He said, no fantasy, just clarity. I followed him into the guest room. The locked drawer was open now. Inside, I saw a single USB, labeled with today's date. Beside it sat a small notepad with a list of items, statements, screenshots, messages, photos, kids' schedule. My heart pounded. What is all this? I asked. He picked up the notepad, folded it in half, and slipped it into his pocket. He said it was just records. I said normal husbands didn't keep records against their wives. He said, normal wives don't humiliate their husbands in restaurants and then call it bravery. I told him he was turning one mistake into his whole personality. He said, no, I'm turning a pattern into a decision. The next day, Ruth texted asking if the kids could sleep over at her place that weekend. She said Marcus had already agreed. I hadn't been asked, just informed. I felt like the walls were closing in, everyone making plans around me, like I was the variable no one trusted. At work, I threw myself into planning a small networking event for our clients. If I could show I was still professional, still successful, maybe it would balance things out. I invited Julian, some vendors, even a few mutual friends who knew both me and Marcus. I wanted people to see me as composed, not desperate. That evening, I told Marcus about the event. I said he should come, that it would show everyone we were fine. He looked at me thoughtfully and asked when it was. I told him Friday at 7, at a downtown co-working space with glass walls and a nice lobby. He said he might stop by. I said, good. People need to see us together. He replied, they will see what they need to see. The way he said it sent a chill up my spine. On Friday, I arrived early to set everything up. The space was bright and modern, with high ceilings and big windows over the street. I arranged the refreshments, checked the music, rehearsed little lines in my head about growth and moving forward. Guests trickled in, co-workers, vendors, a couple of friends. I laughed, told stories, made sure my voice never shook. I could feel people watching me, assessing, but they smiled and nodded and asked about work. Julian showed up late, looking uncomfortable. He stood by the snacks, avoiding my eyes. I pretended not to notice his distance. I needed tonight to look smooth, tidy, normal. Around 8, my phone buzzed. A notification from my calendar popped up. Paper drop, 10:45. I swallowed hard and shoved the phone back into my purse. It suddenly felt like there was a countdown running under the music. When Marcus finally walked in, wearing a dark jacket and that same calm expression, I almost sagged with relief. He greeted a few people, shook hands, made light conversation. To anyone watching, he looked perfectly polite. Maybe this was it, I thought. Maybe he was finally ready to let things go. I went over to him, touched his arm lightly, and said everyone was happy to see him. He said they would be happier to see clarity. I forced a laugh and told him to stop talking like a contract. He said, "This is the last time I need to repeat myself." I asked what that meant. He looked around the room, at the people, the windows, the phones in their hands. Then he turned back to me and said, in a level voice that carried just enough to be heard by the few closest to us, "Selene, I will handle this properly." The lobby was crowded with people rushing past, but Marcus stood calm, his briefcase in hand. A courier handed me an envelope marked Custody Interim and Financial Orders, effective immediately. I opened it, eyes scanning the pages, heart sinking. Everything was formal, precise, undeniable. He looked at me once, nodded, and walked away, leaving me frozen as the papers settled in my hands.